I remember it as clear as yesterday, as if it happened yesterday, even though it was almost 11 entire years ago. I'll let you know right now, I hadn't had the best of childhoods, if we're going to be totally honest. However, it was anything but uneventful. This all actually started on a Friday, on a day where there was no school whatsoever. It actually might have been due to an inbound hurricane that Miami has been known to be plagued with for, well, ever. But it could also be just as equally likely that the superintendent of my school at the time felt like canceling or a holiday. Any way you slice it, it's irrelevant. I was at home playing Super Smash Bros. Melee on my GameCube with my brother Philip. I was 11, soon to be 12, and he was 7, soon to be 8. We did almost everything together, simply because of my lack of social life. But don't let this joint unity fool you. We did not get along at all, in fact. We fought a lot, as brothers typically do. However, at this particular day, my brother and I hadn't been fighting at all. In fact, we hadn't had a fight in nearly a week. We were eager to stay joined, even nosing our way out of each other's business, simply to stay involved. At about 4:30 p.m., and I decide to want to take a break from the game and get some lemonade. I walked down to Short Hall, cut a left to the next hallway leading into the family/dining room, and I went into the kitchen. My father and my stepmother weren't fighting either. Strange, considering I'm actually hard-pressed to think of a moment when they weren't. Anyway, I happened to look over at the giant dinosaur of a TV to notice that they were watching a movie that I'd honestly never heard of. "Hey!" my father yells. I look back at him, startled. "You don't want to watch this. It's too scary for you." I heeded my father's drunken comment and poured my lemonade quickly and left the kitchen, but my curiosity had been aroused. I had to see what he was so concerned with me seeing. I returned to their room where my GameCube was set up on a smaller TV, and my brother had asked why our father yelled when I went in. I told him that they were watching something scary on the kitchen, and we both agreed that we should prove ourselves brave in our father's eyes by watching any amount of that movie we could. Of course, we went back to our game, but we carefully watched the clock, waiting for 6 p.m. when our father would start cooking dinner for us before we left for our church group activities. When he called us into the kitchen, we could catch at least the very end of the movie, which we had deduced would naturally be the scariest parts, and then we could shrug it off as just a movie. Anticipation made my pulse race, the anticipation of waiting for Christmas, but it was different. Dad was going to be so proud of us, I thought. 6 o'clock finally crept up upon us like clockwork. Our father called us into the kitchen. We shot through the house, desperately hoping we could catch the last 10 minutes of that movie. We piled onto the couch while my father stirred some Kraft macaroni and cheese noodles into a boiling pot. And that was it, the moment we had waiting for, and I remember regretting almost immediately sitting in front of that TV after we witnessed. The movie was Jeepers Creepers. We came in at the police station scene where the monster, which is a Wendigo for those who ever wondered about it, pops out and Spider-Man's his way towards the main characters. I remember seeing it and thinking, what the hell is that? I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't look away as the monster revealed its wicked strength and bizarre form and terrible roar. I looked at my brother for a moment and he was just as horrified as I was. But as soon as the movie ended, we shaped up. Our father set our full plates onto the little table kitchen, and completely unaware that me and my brother had just watched the last portion of the movie. We were silent, but traded smiles, short giggles, as though the mask that it had terrified us. I remember trying to lord over my friends in my church group the fact that I had watched the scariest movie ever, which in all respects is still true in my opinion, stating none of them would have been able to handle it, One friend, specifically the pastor's son, Dalton, replied with, "Yeah, you're probably right." As the night came in, and the safety of the light receded, the thrill of what I had achieved begun to wane, and the reality of my fear begun to sink in. I thought, strangely enough, that at that point, especially after having been to church and having a meeting and having a lesson with pastor about God protecting believers, and fear would have been scrubbed clean. But it wasn't. So what did I do to deal with the unshakable fear that infested my little heart? I stayed up until midnight playing Sonic Adventure 2 Battle to distract myself from the images that played themselves over and over again in my head of that horrible monster I saw in that film. In the past, when something had scared me, this method worked, diverting the focus towards something that did not frighten me, something I had power over, and I did have power in this game. I was actually quite very good at Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. Very good, in fact. Finally, midnight rolled around. I was tired enough to sleep. I suspected I would have a nightmare, cry when I wake up, and that would be the end of it. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. As aforementioned, my parents' room opened into a short hallway, which was on their side. My room was on the other side. And something was in the middle, clinging to the wall in a squatting position. There was a figure unlike anything I had ever seen before or since. It was monstrously large, enough to easily inquire or kill a child of my stature, and threaten anyone in the whole family. I could only discern the features it possessed through the darkness of the hallway that it seemed to emit. Sharp claws at the end of its toes and fingers, folded wings like a gargoyle as it rested on its back, stands curly with gossamer-like hair strands, which seemed to be the soft part of the manifestation before me. Yet, most of it seemed to be surrounded in its own darkness. If I was terrified before the apparition made itself visible to me, there was no word to describe the fear that overcame my very soul that night. My voice was stolen out of my throat. I wanted to scream, call for help or something, but instincts begged me to reconsider, as though doing so would antagonizing this interloper. My breath soaked into my chest, my hands clutched the doorknob with such strength as if to force my fingers to shake, my eyes streamed silent, hot tears. Somehow I managed to break the deadlock and close the door, suddenly, as if somehow it wouldn't take notice. I still remained mostly paralyzed, though, as I staggered back to the place between the wall and my TV, and where the GameCube was set up. I lay down on my left side. I wanted to pray, but even the voice in my head was stolen from me. I clutched my arms and curled up, hoping the morning light would come and chase away this nightmare that sat in the hallway. But for the moment, while the door was closed, I was safe. However, to my horror, I saw that door swing smoothly open, creaking as it slowly, and I mean painfully slowly, as if someone had pushed it so politely as not to make a sound as it came in. However, the creaking of the door made it almost like there was a concert hall in my fucking living room, and it was echoing sounds over and over in my head. Although I may be over-exaggerating, but it actually did feel as though I was sitting there for an hour as this door just slowly opened. The tears that were coming out of my eyes were growing in intensity, burning my face. I covered my mouth with both hands, slammed my eyes shut, and I trembled in the dark until exhaustion took the consciousness away from me. But even my sleep could not save me. It pursued me into the depths of my very dreams. In a way, I would come to expect it in the future. I was running for my life past a couple who looked at me in confusion. I could hear voices say, "What's the matter? What's the matter? Are you afraid? Can I help you?" I could never reach out to those people. I could never muster my voice, only run from the nightmare as I ran. It killed, slaughtered, destroyed, and massacred anything that stood between me, it, and myself. When in my dream, I ran into soldiers preparing to fight it, and I knew they were doomed. No weapons they could bring against this monster would even slow it down, only make it angry. And so I abandoned the haven they attempt to make for me, only to find myself alone. It caught me, and I stared up into its face, not long enough to get a good look at it before it devoured me. I woke with a jolt. I was alive? I was alive. The dream felt so real, and fear still paralyzed me. I couldn't speak either. I remember awkwardly trying to move and not being able to speak. I was in a condition for several more days. When I finally came out of it, my family asked what was the matter. I didn't answer them. They wouldn't believe me. How could they? They would just sit there and tell me what I saw wasn't real, as the normal cliche goes. Now, I know you guys may be thinking, oh, that's the story, end the discussion, but it doesn't just end there. I shouldered this for some time alone. That horrible being in the darkness loomed over me everywhere I went. It eventually took up residence in the corner of my room opposite to my bed. I could always imagine it glaring at me in my sleep. Oftentimes it pursued me in my dreams, rippling the fear as often as it could. I became a victim to a demon, and I was entirely powerless to stop it. 2 years later, a friend suggested, when I confided her the truth of my plight, to call the name of the Lord in his presence and demand it to leave. From what I had learned and what I'd been taught, I knew that has to work. Demons aren't more powerful than God, therefore mentioning God and saying that you believe in him would definitely get rid of the demon. The thing I didn't take into account is that demons are definitely more powerful than people. That night, I did just as she said. I waited in my room until I felt its presence. When I turned and saw it towering over me, I began to whisper, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I compel you to be gone!" I repeated it over and over again, progressively getting louder and louder as I said it, only stopping before I came to a shouting point. I could see it was still there, but my confidence had built, for that night at least. I was unafraid until the nightmare occurred. It wasn't long before I started high school, a brand new chapter in my life. The chapter where I could take my first steps into manhood, or so I thought at the time. And it was then when I begun trying to rationalize away the demon that haunted me at night. Because compelling to leave it in the name of Jesus Christ failed to remove it from the room in my house and my life. It must not be actually a demon. Perhaps it was more of a projection of a mentally instilled image of a terrified creature I saw in my young life, and I just needed to adjust to it. Over a very short period of time, it became easy to believe that, but the story does not end there with this quote-unquote revelation. One night, early in my freshman year, mind you, something peculiar happened. The demon was not in my room, manning its typical post. I sat up later than normal that night, as if awaiting its return, mostly out of fear that it would try to get a jump on me in reality, as opposed to my dreams. But the night crept along, and it was nowhere to be seen. Was it gone? Had I done it by acknowledging it was nothing more than a projection of my overactive imagination or image of fear? To quote the Arbiter from Halo 3, if only it were so easy. I was awoken from my sleep that night in a way that I've never forgotten. A blood-curdling scream blasted through the entire house in the middle of the night, waking everyone up. My stepmother and sister were the first to respond to. As the screaming continued, they rushed over to the source of my screaming brother. In his room, adjacent to mine, he screamed as if some horrible thing was attacking him. I saw the light from his room pour into the hallway under the crack of my door. My sisters and my stepmother tried desperately, and I mean desperately, to calm him down, but he was shaking in fear, screaming about being covered in a human-sized hand, and he screamed about spiders just crawling all over him. A nightmare must have been, but a dark premonition lingered in my mind about what could have caused this. My brother bolted away from any notion that it was a dream, and he simply stated, "The spiders are real." And he would insist that they came from a man with red and black eyes. My sister actually told me the next morning that his whole arm shook as he pointed at the curtain. My brother said he was standing in the curtains and laughing. From that night on, in the hours of my darkness, my brother would always scan the dark in the search of the figure with the beaming red eyes. My sister did as I expected she would do with me, as I had confided to her. "It's only your imagination. It's just a dream. Shh." I never said a word to her after that. I wish that I could have talked to my family, but god damn it, being insulted in such a way that I had been seeing things for the better part of 2 years, and that it was just dismissed as an still pisses me off to this day. One night, something happened to me that never happened before. It was actually at my grandmother's house. I was 15. My younger brother was 11. We chose to stay for the weekend because my cousins were in town. The possible thought crossed my mind to tell my cousin Travis, the oldest of the grandkids, but what would that accomplish? My brother woke us all up trembling and crying. He crawled up the 3-seat couch that Travis and I were attempting to share, and he nuzzled between us. After being woken like that, my cousin prompted to ask what's wrong, and my little brother simply stated, "He's here. The man with red eyes, he's outside staring at me." His voice was no higher than a whisper. "He has a knife." I looked at the glass door that fed into the back porch with a brick floor-lined screened wall. And just outside was a figure shrouded in shadows, peering in from the darkness with piercing eyes. It was a shade of red, just as my brother stated. I couldn't compare it to anything but hell itself. In the 4 years this demon had haunted me, it followed me everywhere I went, be it to a friend's house, a family member's, or even out of the state of my mother's. This was nothing new. But never before, and never again, have I seen such eyes as cold that could just strip away courage in a manner like that. I was anything but powerless and afraid, and never before had I seen it in the same way as my brother. That night remained uneventful. I remember one night when I was 16 and I was growing fed up with this stupid fear that something only exists in the dark place at night, one place where I should feel the safest, but where I felt the most endangered. But enough was enough, I thought to myself. I'm 16, damn it, and I'm not gonna be bothered by some stupid fear that I had when I was a stupid little kid. I shot up and out of my bed, the only real courage I felt through this experience, though I had said it was only a stupid fear. I knew it was a very real stupid fear. I stared at the dark, searching for the eyes I knew to be red. After not seeing its eyes open, I hopped off my bed like a cat, as if I was still afraid of provoking it. I remained in this place motionless, and I walked towards it, half expecting it to vanish the closer I got, proving once and for all it was a figment of my imagination, or for it to attack me as it attacked my brother, proving once and for all it was a demon and I need to consider contacting my local pastor. The only sound breaking the suffocating silence was the pounding of my own heart that compelled me to reconsider my present actions. The other was my still-fit breath, heavy from fear and the rapid beat of my heart. At least, I stood before it. This giant thing haunted me every moment of every night for the past 4 years. Encroaching 5 now. It was broad, probably as wide as 3 of me. It exuded not just darkness, but it projected power. I could feel this tremendous pressure surrounding me, pressing me down as if to force me onto my knees, but I wouldn't let myself fall. I stretched out my trembling fingers from a shaky hand and reached my hand forward. I'll pass my hand through it, and it'll disappear. And then I'll be rid of it, I assured myself. This plan had to work. One can't touch a figment of its own imagination in reality, right? It would simply vanish, and reality would set in, and reality certainly did set in. My hand disappeared into the shadow, and for a moment, as I swiped through the dark figure, it emerged as logically as it should. But the shadowy figure remained. This demon would not be chased away so easily. And then I knew this was no figment. It wasn't the boogeyman. It wasn't some nightmare from years ago that came around every so often. It was real. And I stepped back and away from it. I felt it pushing down on me. Not with its body, but with the very pressure I felt when I stood before it. It continued to go stronger and stronger and stronger until I leaped across the room, landing on my bed. I still didn't feel safe. I had angered it, or made it laugh. I don't really know, honestly. A lot of things would start changing for the better, at least for it seemed that year. My mother was moving to Georgia, my stepfather out of Florida, and into Walton Beach, a place where the demon made it a habit to fly over the trees above my head and briefly eclipse the moon when I walked home from my neighbors after catching fish or something new, really. They had invited me to come up and stay with them in a hotel for a couple of weeks as they sorted out moving into the new house. But the demon would follow me there as well, as it always did, and as I had to come to believe as it always would. It's a presence that became so familiar, and I was even aware of it during the day. It became so apparent to me that I never really felt truly alone. It only became less visible. I had come to believe that this fear would be constant in my life. A fear of the thing that was real, that would chase me into the shadows, or it would try to invade every sanctuary in my mind, and even my dreams. He would come into it and warp it into a frightening illusion, so close to reality that I couldn't tell the difference. But one night in that hotel, the biggest change of all happened. I went to sleep, completely aware that that demon was watching me from a far corner in the hotel room opposite to my parents' bed. I knew that my fear had waned once again. I knew that a nightmare would be coming, even in my dream. I just knew that it was coming. And in that dream, it was a night of a full moon. I was surrounded by my closest friends, all attempting to enjoy themselves in the company of the late night swim at a watering hole found in the woods conveniently by a road. I knew what was going to happen, so I needed to keep watch. It was coming for all of us, and we would have to run. That's when a swift shadow passed over us, created by the moonlight. I knew it wasn't some bird, and I called out to my friends to run as fast as they possibly could to the vehicles. There was a black truck, a yellow punch buggy, and a white sedan. My best friend at the time, Gene, and I took the punch buggy. I don't know why or how that happened, or even where the buggy came from. But before we could follow the others on the road, there was something cutting us off, and it stood menacingly, flashing those damn red eyes that burned brighter than the high beams of the car. "Ram it!" I said to Gene. He punched the gas, the tires screamed, the little car shot forward, and much to Gene's surprise, it leaped into the air and ran over the top of the car. Just like in the movie Jeepers Creepers, it was attempting to recreate that initial fright that started it all. But instead of staying for it to try again, I urged Gene to keep it going, keep on running. I knew from the previous nightmare that there was no fucking fighting this thing. We had gone for more than 5 minutes before it came upon a wreckage of other vehicles. They were completely completely just torn apart. My friends were still alive inside, but just barely, bleeding out as I watched them gasp for breaths. Jean and I quickly tried to haul them back to their feet as fast as they possible. The ones that could run would hopefully do so, while the others would have to stay behind. 3 walls shot up around us, blocking us in. There was no fucking way out this time. And when we turned around, there it was, standing at the far end, waiting to kill us all. I looked at my friend. He was afraid. He was fucking afraid. What kind of dream does this? I turned my head over my shoulder to see my other friends hurt and equally as afraid. And I look forward again at this demon as it thirsts for blood. I wanted so bad to protect my friends, to save them from this gruesome fate that this demon would inflict on them. My hands balled up into fists, and I started walking straight towards it, with everything urging me to run away. It trudged towards me. I could feel this pressure that was pounding away at my spirit, sapping my courage. Every moment we drew closer until the last we stood face to face. I trembled just as we did. As I did, for the last time, I had faced it. It was so powerful that I wanted to collapse and die there. But I didn't, fearing I didn't have much time left. The desire to save my friends, I looked up into his face and saying a few words, "Get out!" My heart pounded out of my chest and I waited to see what happened next. Would it skewer me on a spike, or would it chop me into pieces with a blade-edged wing? Or just continue to crush me with its titanic force? I didn't know. But I wouldn't allow it to see that I was afraid this time. To my shock, even to this day, 7 years later, it turned its back to me and walked away. The pressure subsided, my pounding heart returned to normal, and I could breathe again. And for the first time in 5 years, I woke up without feeling totally afraid. Was it over? Eventually, I would come to tell my sister about what I experienced, but only her. I didn't have to tell my brother about it. He saw it too. To finally be able to tell him what I wanted to say, that he wasn't crazy. That I believed him every time he said he saw the man of red eyes. Meant to be... I don't know. I still didn't think that my parents would have believed me, and I was right. They wouldn't have. Not unless they had seen it for themselves. For years and years it stayed a secret between my brother and I and my sister. Respectfully, we could actually all trust each other. But we knew that everyone else would think that I was just seeing things, or Philip and I were just little kids of overacted imaginations. And even my sister was guilty of this at one point. Even my sister didn't believe it to me until I started explaining to her why my brother and I were seeing things just the way I described, and we actually did come up with stories that were exactly the same. And all she could say was, "I'm glad I never saw it," and she would laugh. As of this point in time, I'm actually 23 years old, and I still believe that all of this is behind me after my victory. And now, it serves as a story to either motivate people that fear can be conquered, or it could be used to scare the crap out of whoever I wanted. But last fall, while we were up at college, I received a phone call from my stepmother, and this is the unusual part, mind you. The thing that was unusual was the first thing she asked me was, "Have you ever seen something in the house?" A loaded question. I thought, sure, I had seen lots of things in the house, but what specifically was she getting at? I asked, and she told me a short story of what happened before, and I will repeat it for you right now. I was laying in bed when I had to go to the bathroom. When I sat up, I saw something dark move in front of the bed and go into my bathroom. I thought it was your younger brother, but when I laid back down, he was asleep in the bed next to me. I don't need any more evidence to know what I had been through and what I had seen was real, but now, at last, I could explain to her those frightening moments in our past that perplexed her to this very day. I told her how I discovered it was a demon and how it fed off my fear. It also latched Philip and stayed there for 5 years. I told her everything, the nightmares everywhere I went, Philip and I, and all the stories I told you, plus some. She investigated and she discovered something truly frightening. Ours was not the only house that the demon had been in. Most of the people that I want to say 20 out of 30, all said they saw the same thing. A dark figure that would enter their house and unexplainable stuff would happening. Everything from mildly scaring to outright terrifying. Doors opening without any mention of how they possibly could. Or things flying off the shelf in a very violent manner. Some people even experience worse things than me, where they've been actually physically attacked with a bladed weapon. And the sad thing is that this all happened to the opposite side of the neighborhood where my house was. We didn't know to this day what that was, that demon intentionally summoned or not, but people unleashed a powerful evil into this world that continues to lurk in the shadows, in the place that I used to call home. Hell, I mean, demons could be in more places than once, and they can visit more homes than needed to be. So, perhaps if you have invoked something dangerous, you now have the tools to possibly stop it. Or if you try to do something, it's very possible you could get hurt. I can offer no advice on what to do should you encounter a supernatural experience such as this. But just understand that even though I told it not to, I don't even know. I'm scared, man. I'm scared for my family. I'm signing off. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host That Creepy Reading, and today I would like to talk to you about a narration I just recently did of a story simply known as A Haunting. This was actually a fairly decent story. At first, I thought that it was gonna lack depth and any real character motivation, but really it feels almost like an anthology of stories told with one single thing that seemed to connect them together. I didn't really particularly like the ending, however, there is one thing that does disturb me about the story. It is claimed to be a very true story by the author, or at least based on true events that have happened. I have not contacted the author of this story, A Haunting, but one thing does bother me. It feels oddly reminiscent of real life. Have you guys ever stayed up and watched a horror film that, maybe you shouldn't be watching? Hell, I remember when I watched a movie called Darkness Falls. I saw just the beginning intro of it, and it still to this day scares the living shit out of me. Or at least the intro did. The actual movie itself is kind of terrible, but I see where this author's coming at, and I can actually relate to this story quite a bit. A lot of the things in the story is very realistic, and I would like to call attention to that. The fact that the author didn't just stop at the point where he found his first encounter and say, "Oh, this thing is haunting me," makes the story better. If it stopped there, it would be just a shit generic story that's way too short to be remembered. But as this long narration, I felt like I could actually act out the character and relate more with the general events of the story. If you enjoy stories like this, feel free to visit creepypasta.com based on a true story. You'll find plenty of other stories like this that you might be able to suggest to me, and I might be willing to narrate it. If you guys would like to see 2 other narrations, I got them on the screen now, and you just have to click their thumbnail to go to them. If you guys would like to help the show financially, you can always donate on Patreon. And if you don't have any money to rather do a one-time donation or just, a multiple amount of donation or whatever, You could always simply just go on and subscribe to the channel, leave a comment on the video, like the video. Any interaction you do with the channel does help me out quite a bit, and in this time where I'm about to move out of my house and move into a different living situation, I find myself scared, so yeah, any help I can get really means a lot. This has been your host, That Creepy Reading, letting you know there's always something in the darkness. Signing off.